Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, we're going to talk about the trade deadline upcoming this Thursday afternoon. We're going to talk all things Marcus Smart, the rumor that the Timberwolves could be interested in Marcus Smart. Will the Timberwolves acquire him? I'll tell you why I don't think they will and why I don't think they should acquire Marcus Smart. Also on the Timberwolves roster, which players are most likely to be traded? There's one in particular. If the Wolves were to make a trade, he's the most likely player to be moved. Also previewing Wolves Kings. The Timberwolves play Sacramento twice this week. It's all upcoming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked on Wolves podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked on Wolves. I'm also editor of Dunking with Wolves, the Timberwolves site on the Fansided Network. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Happy Timberwolves game day. The Timberwolves are in Sacramento to take on the Kings twice in 24 hours this week. We're going to talk about that on the show, but also, plenty of other stuff to talk about. Trade deadline is this Thursday. We're going to get into that here in just a moment. First of all, though, thank you for making Locked on Wolves your first listen each and every day. Locked on Wolves is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, plus all your favorite audio platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked on T-Wolves and at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, trade deadline is Thursday. There's a lot of rumors out there surrounding the Timberwolves. The most notable one started late last week. The Timberwolves' interest in Marcus Smart has now been well documented. Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report mentioned it last week. More recently, Darren Wolfson in the Twin Cities has been talking about the Timberwolves are keeping an eye on Marcus Smart, have talked actual offers with the Celtics, but the Celtics have a fairly high asking price, understandably so. I want to talk through what that rumored asking price is, why I would not pay it, and why I don't think the Timberwolves would pay it either. We're going to talk about all that here today. And then I want to get into the Wolves roster, which players are most likely to be traded on the roster, if anybody, and what type of a deal could the Timberwolves get done. We'll close the show by previewing the Timberwolves Kings games this week. Of course, one of those is Tuesday night, one is Wednesday night. So we'll knock it all out. We've only seen the Kings once this year, and it's been quite some time. So want to get into that to close the show. Let's start with the Marcus Smart thing. So the origins of this rumor go back to late last week. This was first mentioned by Jake Fisher over at Bleacher Report, and then backed up more recently by Darren Wolfson, of course, of KSTP and Score North in the Twin Cities. And the rumor essentially was that the Timberwolves, the rumor initially from Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report was that the Timberwolves were interested in acquiring Smart as a potential replacement for Patrick Beverley in the event that Pat Bev is moved at the deadline. Now, I said on the show last week when I mentioned this rumor that Patrick Beverley is not going anywhere. He's not going to be traded. I understand that his name's out there as, hey, the Wolves are, that's more other teams asking, hey, what would we need to give to get Pat Bev? That's not the Timberwolves saying what's out there for Patrick Beverley. If the Wolves, flip the record, if the Wolves, instead of being 3 games above 500, were 3 games below 500, I know that that's not that big of a difference. I mean, it's a 6-game swing. If I don't know, if the Wolves were like 9th or 10th in the West, would they be exploring trading Patrick Beverley? Yes, they absolutely would, but they're not. They're 3 games above 500. They've won 4 in a row. They haven't lost at home since the start of the new year. Think the schedule gets a little bit easier, grand scheme of things moving forward, than it was for the first couple months of the season. Things are looking up for the Timberwolves. Why rock the boat? Why trade Patrick Beverley? I understand he's an expiring contract. We've been hearing those since early November, that the Timberwolves and Beverley have been discussing a potential contract extension. Remember, this is a guy who's about to be 32. He would love to get a couple of years of security with the team that will very likely be a playoff team the next couple of years. And Beverley's stated he likes it in Minnesota. The Timberwolves like Beverley. I mean, unless somebody's giving up multiple first-round picks for an expiring contract, a 31-year-old point guard, I don't think that's happening. Patrick Beverley's not going anywhere. So let's start there, that if that's truly the only instance the Wolves are interested in Marcus Smart, then why would they do that? Now, the second piece of this is Wolfson seems to think the Wolves could still be interested in Smart, even if they don't trade Beverley. That's where things get tricky from a salary perspective. The only way you could do that is by trading Malik Beasley, and that's apparently what the Wolves have discussed with the Celtics. Now, I'll start with my issue. Well, actually, no. Let's talk about the potential parameters of a deal first. So the rumor, according to Wolfson, was that the Timberwolves would want to trade Malik Beasley to get Marcus Smart, which makes sense. He would immediately assume Beasley's minutes. The contracts are similar in terms of dollar amount, not in terms of length. And I'll get into that here in a minute. So the rumor is that the Celtics are requiring either Jaden McDaniels or a first round pick attached to Malik Beasley to acquire Marcus Smart. That's a high price. Now, to be very clear, Marcus Smart is a fantastic player. He's been on an all defensive team twice in his career. He has been a lockdown defender for essentially his entire career. He's improved offensively over the course of his career. And there's no question he would make the Timberwolves defense a lot better. Now, the flip side of this is if you're not trading Patrick Beverley, which again, we've established that they're not doing that there's almost no chance they trade Patrick Beverley. Now you've acquired another defense first player who plays a similar position, who, yes, maybe is a little bit better with the basketball in his hands than Patrick Beverley, a little more dynamic in terms of a passer, but not that much more. And he's a worse shooter than Patrick Beverley. So how are you going to justify giving Malik Beasley minutes, which understanding he was really bad in November and December and much of January in general. But when Malik Beasley's Malik Beasley, see the game on Sunday night that the Timberwolves, or Sunday afternoon when they beat Detroit, or, a handful of games this year, or all of his Timberwolves career up until this season, then Malik Beasley is a much better fit for the current roster as long as Beverley's on it. Smart and Beverley are redundant enough that giving up true assets, in this case, Beasley and a first or Jaden McDaniels, is a lot to give up for a guy who's redundant with what you have in Patrick Beverley. So the Wolves' first choice would no doubt be to extend Patrick Beverley. And I don't know what he's going to get in a contract extension, but again, given his age, it's not going to be a lot. It's not going to be as much as Marcus Smart is making. Marcus Smart just signed a 4-year extension worth $72 million. He's getting paid just under $15 million this year on his old contract. His new extension kicks in next year, $16.6 million, and it increases each year by $2.5 million, about $2 million until the 25-26 season, when you'll be paying a Marcus Smart that will be 31. So Patrick Beverley's age now, $21.3 million. That's a lot to pay a 31-year-old defense first guard. Patrick Beverley is making about $14 million this year, which is a lot to pay Patrick Beverley too. But Timberwolves fans know how valuable he's been to the team this year. And he's been a valuable player throughout his NBA career. He's not going to get $14 million on his next contract, but you're going to have you'll be able to kind of pencil him in as, all right, we've got a rotation guy that can play both guard spots, be defense first, be the heartbeat of the team, keep up the intensity on both ends of the floor with this team, be big in the locker room, and lock him in at, I don't know, 9, 10, 11 million, which would still be kind of a lot, but something like that annually. Otherwise, you're going to pay an aging Marcus Smart, who, is just entering his prime now. I get that, but still locked in for the next 4 years, $72 million over 4 years is a lot to pay a guy. It's not a bad contract for the Celtics necessarily. I'm not suggesting that Smart's not worth the money necessarily. I'm saying, would the Wolves really want to give up true assets to acquire somebody who's kind of, at the contract's iffy, in my opinion? And you've got Patrick Beverley, who you really like. And if you're not trading Beverley, then why would you do that? The only way it makes sense is if you're going to get a first-round pick for Beverley, you're going to trade out Beasley and a first-round pick for Smart. So you're essentially just swapping Beasley and Beverley for Smart, and you're hanging on to Jaden McDaniels. You could make that argument. Again, that's a trade I make if the Wolves are maybe 3 games under 500, not 3 games over 500. Why rock the boat? If you can extend Beverley at a reasonable contract, you can hang on to McDaniels, you can hang on to your picks. Why would you pay for the privilege to possibly overpay Marcus Smart on the back half of his current contract? Again, to be clear, Marcus Smart is fantastic, and the Wolves would be better if he was on the team. But does that make sense right now with how well the Wolves are playing and Beasley's contract not looking bad if he actually plays better with some consistency moving forward? Why would the Wolves want to give up assets for the right to potentially overpay Marcus Smart? So I don't think that trade should happen. I don't think it will happen. I don't think the Wolves are excited to trade Jaden McDaniels and Malik Beasley for Marcus Smart. I don't think there's hardly any chance they trade Patrick Beverley, period. So unless the Celtics decide, okay, we'll do it for Beasley straight up, I think maybe there need to be, actually the money might work without another asset. But basically Beasley straight up, or Beasley and one of the second rounders. The Wolves have 3 second rounders this year. Maybe the Timberwolves do that. Again, it's a little bit of a rock the boat move when you may not need it. But Marcus Smart is a better player than Malik Beasley. I just think that if you're hanging on to Beverly, it makes more sense to have Beasley on your roster than Marcus Smart, who again duplicates a lot of what Beverly does. Okay. So I guess this boils down to, I don't think it happens. I don't think it should happen. I think it's just much ado about nothing, unless something crazy happens in the next 2 days, basically. However, we still have to talk about the deadline as a whole, the Timberwolves roster, who on the roster is most likely to be moved. If anybody's moved Thursday, what is the most likely type of move that the Timberwolves could make? Let's break that all down next before we get to Wolves Kings. First, though, let's talk about our friends at TurboTax. People think unusual circumstances mean complicated taxes. But for TurboTax Live experts, that's what makes things interesting. We all have unique lives, whether you invested in crypto for the first time this year, own an up-and-coming small business, or are raising rambunctious twins. Luckily, TurboTax Live has experts who can answer your tax questions, walk you through the whole process, or do your taxes for you from start to finish. They help you get every deduction you deserve, no matter your unique situation, and you can talk to a TurboTax Live expert through your phone or computer without leaving your house. TurboTax Live experts are here to help you however you need, and if you need an extra hand your taxes off to them. They'll do it all for you. To TurboTax Live experts, an interesting life can mean an even greater refund. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. You do your thing. They've got your taxes. Into it, TurboTax Live. All right. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen. Genuinely appreciated. Seriously, greatly appreciated. If you do listen, if you're subscribed to the podcast, please like it on YouTube, follow it, subscribe to it, whatever channel you like to listen to it on. A reminder that the trade deadline, of course, as I've been talking about, is this coming Thursday, the 10th at 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern. The Locked On NBA podcast will cover it live from 1 to 3 p.m. Central. That's 2 to 4 Eastern. Join Kim Becker, John Corrales, and Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to get analysis of every blockbuster move. Subscribe to Locked On NBA YouTube and turn your notifications on so you know when they go live. All right, let's talk Timberwolves roster and who I think would be most likely to be traded. I think the best way to look at this is to take guys off the table who are simply not getting traded. There's zero chance Karl-Anthony Towns is being traded. Zero chance. Absolutely zero. Don't pay attention to any of the, I'm not going to call it any specific sites, any of the sites out there that are putting these, not Garnett, Karl-Anthony Towns to Warriors for 4 bench players type trades. That's not happening. Anthony Edwards, also not happening. Neither one of those. I mean, there's no chance. There's no reason to talk about it. I would say D'Angelo Russell is highly unlikely to be traded. Highly, highly unlikely, unless the Sixers take him as part of what would ultimately be probably an underwhelming return for Ben Simmons. I don't think he's getting traded. I don't think he gets moved in like a Miles Turner trade. I think a John Collins trade would be really tough to pull off, and I don't think that would happen. So don't pay attention to trade possibilities with D'Angelo Russell unless it's something that somehow realistically could get the Sixers what they want and land Ben Simmons in Minnesota. I think it's really unlikely. I would put Towns and Edwards as zero chance and Russell only slightly above that because he could be had in the right deal for a massive star. But again, talking about a guy that was, you could make an argument he's been a top 30 player this year. I mean, he's close to a borderline all-star this season. Other guys that are not getting traded, Jared Vanderbilt, same thing. Weirdly enough, I'd put him in the same category as D'Angelo Russell, in that the only way he's getting moved is if he's like, for some reason, the sticking point in a massive trade for like a Ben Simmons. He's such a great value in his contract. It just would make no sense. And I would actually put in a similar category the likes of Jalen Noel, maybe even Naz Reid, because again, the value, I'm not saying Naz Reid is as good as Jared Vanderbilt or as good as D'Angelo Russell, but the value for both Reid, for Naz Reid, the value for Jared Vanderbilt, and also arguably Jalen Noel, what they're able to provide for the cost of their contract is so impressive that it doesn't make any sense to trade them. You're not going to improve while taking on more money. Why would you want to do that for a lateral move, essentially, to take on more money for a player who may only be marginally better? You're not going to do better than Jared Vanderbilt. It's going to be hard to find a better backup center than Naz Reid. It's going to be hard to find a bench scorer on a better contract than Jalen Noel. Yes, there's better bench scorers. Yes, there's better all-around players than Jalen Noel. But the Noel contract is such a steal, I don't think it happens. Patrick Beverley, similar situation. I don't think he's traded unless it's part of a much bigger deal. So then I think we get into the guys that probably aren't going to be traded simply because why would anybody want to trade for them? Jake Layman, Jordan McLaughlin. Also, why would the Wolves trade their third string point guard when both Beverley and Russell tend to get hurt? They get banged up quite a bit. Why would you trade Jordan McLaughlin? I don't know. Why would anybody want to trade for Jake Layman as anything more than a salary match or a throw in? I don't know. Those guys probably aren't going anywhere unless it's part of a bigger deal. Same with Leandro Balmaro. I don't think anybody's seeking him out unless somebody that really liked him in the draft process last year says, oh, I wonder if we can get him for a couple second rounders. I don't think the Wolves would do that because why would they? I think he could have a rotation spot next year. I mean, Josh Okogie's on an expiring contract. Obviously, Taurean Prince, Jake Layman. There's going to be roster spots next year. I don't think Balmaro is traded unless, again, he's the sticking point in a much larger deal for a big name. So that leaves us with just a couple of names. Taurean Prince would be one. Now, he's played so well lately. Obviously, he sprained his ankle on Sunday afternoon, but he had averaged like 18 points over the last 4 games, I believe, and scored 20 plus the 2 games prior to the win over the Pistons on Sunday. I don't think it's likely that Taurean Prince is going to be traded. I think he fits this team really well. He seems to be a great teammate. It's unlikely that he's traded again, unless it's as part of a bigger deal. I would have said maybe 3 weeks ago, and this is why teams wait until as close as they can to the deadline. Obviously, deadlines are what makes deals happen in life in general. But if the Timberwolves a month ago had tried to trade Taurean Prince, they maybe could have gotten a second round pick and obviously salary filler to get him, to land him. Now, I don't know that they would trade him for that. Why would they? He's a big part of this rotation when he's healthy. There's no sense in trading Taurean Prince unless you have to, or unless it really makes sense, I should say, unless you have to make a bigger deal happen. And that kind of leaves us with Jaden McDaniels. Jaden McDaniels and Josh Okogie. So I'll talk about McDaniels first. I would put McDaniels in a very similar category to Vanderbilt and the Vanderbilt Noel Reed category, but obviously with greater value, but a similar conversation. The value of his contract because of his age, he's 20, the fact that he's already a plus defender at the NBA level, and the toolsiness, to borrow a baseball term, that he shows on offense is tantalizing. I mean, if he truly becomes a two-way player with the size that he's got, he's 6'10", 6'11" at this point with crazy length, athleticism, a developing jumper. He's got some handles. He's figuring out the court vision thing. The feel is still a little bit not quite there, but it's getting there. I mean, why would the Wolves trade him unless it, again, is a sticking point to land, say, Ben Simmons? But I don't think he even gets moved in a Miles Turner deal. A month ago, I was advocating for that. I was saying, hey, if you can trade a pick, Malik Beasley and Jaden McDaniels for Miles Turner, I think you got to look at that. It's a year and a half of Miles Turner. He's really good. Well, if Jaden McDaniels is, he's obviously a different player, but essentially, if they made that trade, Miles Turner would move into the rotation, McDaniels would move out of the rotation, and you'd see more Towns and Turner playing together. So he would essentially take those McDaniels minutes. McDaniels is 65% of the player that Miles Turner is sitting here right now. And you've got on a much more affordable deal, 2 years left instead of 1 after this one on McDaniels' rookie deal. Arguably a more versatile defender in terms of a wing defender. The Wolves need wing defenders. I just don't know that would make a lot of sense. I don't know that it genuinely makes the team better. And again, the long-term upside is still so great. Even if you don't need him to do more than score 8 or 9 a game and knock down open threes and play lockdown defense right now, in 2 years, the Wolves may need him to be that second or third star on the team. We don't know. So I don't think it's likely McDaniels is traded. I wouldn't call him untouchable because, again, he could be had for the right price, unlike Towns and Edwards. But he's somewhere in between that D'Angelo Russell category and the Jared Vanderbilt category, where somebody's really got to come and make a Godfather offer for this guy, or he's got to be the piece that lands you a Ben Simmons. Doesn't make sense to trade him. So in conclusion, I think Josh Okogie's the guy. I mean, if you're going to say the player on the roster most likely to be traded has to be Josh Okogie. He is a valuable defender. We've already talked about how the Utah Jazz are rumored to be interested in him, done some due diligence. They were interested in Robert Covington before he was dealt to the Clippers over the weekend. They've been interested in Harrison Barnes. There's a couple other wing defenders they've reportedly been interested in. Okogie's the longest tenured Wolf next to Karl-Anthony Towns. He's on an expiring deal. It's the 4th year in the league. He's only making a little over $4 million. So he's affordable as a late first round pick. He's an expiring contract. He's a plus defender, but he's also limited. If a team decides to offer a first round pick for Josh Okogie, I don't think they will. But if they do, he's gone. I mean, the Timberwolves would trade him in a heartbeat. Sitting here right now, I know he's hurt, but they played 11 guys on Sunday. Josh Okogie's the 12th guy in that rotation. Now, Taurean Prince is banged up. We know that this team's had a lot of injuries. Depth is important, all that stuff, which is why I don't think they just give him away. But if somebody offers a first round pick and a serviceable player or another expiring contract back or something, I think you do it. I think you trade Josh Okogie. There could be teams who just want a 10th guy who can come in and use some fouls and be active and aggressive and guard a strong wing player on the opposing team in a playoff setting or down the stretch in the season to spell some of their frontline guys. I think there's a real chance that Okogie gets traded, but I also don't think they give him away because for the same reasons I listed. The Wolves need their own depth on the wing. But I think he's the name to watch. If anybody's traded, I put Okogie as by far the most likely player to be traded, followed by, if it's not an Okogie trade, I think it would have to be a major trade that would involve Malik Beasley and multiple picks. It would be like a Marcus Smart type deal, which again, I don't think is likely to happen, but that would be the next most likely scenario. So I guess in conclusion of the entire trade conversation, I think it's highly unlikely the Wolves do anything. If they do something, it'll be a Josh Okogie style type move. But don't get your hopes up for something massive. And I think Timberwolves fans as a whole, if I could speak for the entire fan base, we're okay with that. Timberwolves fans are okay with that because of the cohesion this team's shown. And I know that recency bias is a really dangerous thing with the 4 straight wins over not the greatest competition, save for the Denver win, which is really nice. But a couple wins over the Pistons, some shorthanded teams that they beat. It can be dangerous, but also look at as a whole, you're talking about a team that's 3 games above 500, only a game out of the 6th spot in the West. The schedule's going to get easier. The team's going to get healthier. Why rock the boat? Why rock the boat? I just think it's unlikely that Sachin Gupta feels any different when we get to Thursday afternoon. Okay, let's close the show by previewing Wolves Kings, talking about what happened the last time these teams faced off and what to expect out of the Kings here on Tuesday night in Sacramento. First, though, let's talk about the title sponsors of today's show. That, of course, is BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues the march through the playoffs, including the big game this coming weekend. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And of course, it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, plus live, real-time updates of current games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers available throughout 2022. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's talk Wolves Kings. So Timberwolves haven't seen the Kings for quite some time. This was a 10-point win at Target Center way back in like early November. And it was a game that the Wolves actually trailed at halftime. They had to use a big second half to win that one. Anthony Edwards was really good. Karl-Anthony Towns was solid in that game. Looking back, let's see here. So Ant had 26 on 24 shots. Cat had 22, 6 and 4 on only 12 shots in this game. D'Angelo Russell had 17 and 7. Pat Bev started to have 14 points. This was the start of what I like to call, or I should say, borrowed from John Schumann at NBA.com, the greatest lineup ever, the current preferred starting lineup. This is right when they started to use that lineup in early November. And that was kind of it. It was another kind of pedestrian Malik Beasley game, not a whole lot out of anyone else from the bench. This was all about the big 3, Towns, Edwards, and Russell in this game, and it ended up being a 10-point Minnesota win. They did struggle with De'Aaron Fox with his speed and ability. He had 28 points on 20 shots in this game, and that was kind of the biggest issue for the Wolves. Also, Buddy Hield always seems to hurt the Timberwolves, and he's another name that to look out for getting traded this Thursday for sure from the Kings. And the Wolves were able to pull away late in this one. The Kings look a little different now, of course. They have a new coach after firing Luke Walton since, obviously Walton was coaching early in the season. So things are certainly not the same between these two teams, but this is another game that the Timberwolves should win. As for what the Kings have been up to lately, it's just kind of been what you would expect out of the Kings. They recently had a 7-game losing streak. They did beat the Nets, but who hasn't? The Nets have lost, 7 in a row now. They lost to the Warriors after that and then beat the Thunder most recently by 10 here over the weekend. So, you're looking at a team that's now 20 and 35, is the 3rd worst team in the Western Conference, has been disappointing. Although I will say before the season, and at some point I'm going to go back and look at all these predictions that I made. I will take some credit that I scoffed at the idea that so many people were putting the Kings ahead of the Timberwolves in the West. I thought that was absolutely absurd. The Kings are not good. They were never going to be good. In no world were the Kings going to be good. The Timberwolves were going to be decent as long as they didn't have the same injury issues, knock on wood, that have plagued them the last forever years. Um, and sure enough, the Timberwolves are pretty good and the Kings are not, which is exactly what I thought would happen when the season started. And the Kings have been, relatively healthy, all things considered, as much as any team could be, almost 2/3 of the way through the season. So, in terms of how they play, the Kings still play fast. They're still a very bad defensive team. They can be good offensively, because they play fast and because they get to the free throw line a fair amount. Their free throw rate is actually top 10 in the league, although they're bottom 10 in terms of free throw percentage once they get to the line. Surprisingly, though, they're only 10th or I should say 20th. They're 10th from the bottom in 3-point attempts per game and 21st in 3-point attempt rate, despite having Buddy Hield launching 9 per game. But again, he comes off the bench for them. And so besides him, Harrison Barnes has been really good this season. De'Aaron Fox has been solid. But there's not much else to write home about with this team. Davion Mitchell has had a nice year. Tyrese Halliburton, of course, I loved him in the pre-draft process last year and thought if the Wolves didn't land at number 1, Halliburton would be a really good target somewhere in the top 5 or top 10, certainly for the Wolves. But those are kind of the guys you got to look out for. De'Aaron Fox is somebody I mentioned before the Wolves struggled with the last time the Wolves played the Kings. You put Patrick Beverley on him, and that's probably what the Wolves will do. You keep Jaden McDaniels nearby, although I think he'll probably be locking up Tyrese Halliburton in this game, and then when Buddy Hield's in the game as well. And then Harrison Barnes obviously is difficult. I think Jared Vanderbilt probably ends up with that assignment. And as long as Karl-Anthony Towns can stay out of foul trouble, and I feel like I say this previewing every single game, the Wolves should be fine in this one. The Kings aren't going to be able to slow down the Wolves offense the way it's been playing lately. It's the Timberwolves offense is still has the best offensive rating of any team going back to early January. So, the defense has been, not good of late. It really hasn't been. If the Wolves get into track meet with the Kings, they should be able to win. However, the dangerous thing is that you've got guys like Buddy Hield that can get hot and guys like De'Aaron Fox that can just get to the free throw line all of a sudden a bunch. And then that could put the Wolves in a tough spot. Remember, the Wolves remain the league's worst team when it comes to opponent free throw rate. They have not been able to stop fouling opponents. They're dead last in the league by far. They're still 30th in personal fouls per game. While they've improved getting themselves to the free throw line more, they can't stop fouling. The likes of De'Aaron Fox and company could make life difficult for Minnesota, could make this more of an ugly win like the Pistons win on Sunday. And I think that's a real possibility, at least in one of these two games. It's always hard to beat a team twice in a row, especially 2 consecutive games on their home floor. So I guess the last thing I'd leave you with is it wouldn't shock me if the Timberwolves lost one of these 2 games on Tuesday or Wednesday. And as long as it's not, a blowout loss, as long as they win the other one, as long as they don't lose 2, it's going to be hard for me to come out of these games in Sacramento, feeling like the sky is falling, I think. So all that to say, wouldn't shock me if they lose a game. I should also point out the Timberwolves injury report is suddenly a little bit longer, but everybody's questionable, save for McKinley Wright, who injured his wrist in the G League and wouldn't have been playing anyway with the Timberwolves. But Patrick Beverley's still in the injury report with the ankle sprain, but he's played in the last couple games. Josh Okogie has missed the last few games. He's still on the injury report as questionable with the quad contusion. Taurean Prince, who sprained his ankle in the first half and didn't return on Sunday, is also questionable with the ankle. D'Angelo Russell has played on Sunday, but he's questionable with the shin contusion. Maybe he sits out. I'm just speculating. Maybe he sits out Tuesday or Wednesday, just to be cautious with it. And then Naz Reid, who went down late in that game like a ton of bricks, and it looked bad initially. He's questionable with a knee contusion. So it appears as though there was no structural damage, but clearly his knee didn't bend the right direction there. So 5 guys listed as questionable for this game, at least 4 of whom would be in the rotation if they were able to play. So we'll see what the lineup looks like on Tuesday night. Of course, we'll do the post-game pod immediately following the game. That'll post here, and that will be Wednesday's show. We'll do the same thing Wednesday night. And then obviously if there's any trade rumors, we'll also cover that on the show along with the post-game pod over the next couple days. Anything major, I'll cover it on the show. We'll do a quick video as well for YouTube and for social media if anything does happen. So be sure you're following and subscribe to the show. Thank you again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, we're available everywhere, including YouTube, Apple, Google, Spotify, and the all-new Odyssey app. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. Thanks again for listening to Locked On Wolves, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. And while you're making Locked On Wolves your first listen, go ahead and make Locked On Bets your second listen. Locked On Bets is your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.